Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, or even good night, depending on when you're watching this. We have another architectural history presentation. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about a really interesting piece of modern architecture, which you're able to see here on the screen. This is the Shard, found in London, England, and this may seem like a very random choice out of nowhere, but allow me to provide somewhat of a reason for this selection. So over the summer, I had the opportunity to go to England, and I was able to spend a couple of days in London, walking through the streets, seeing the sights, eating the food, which wasn't too bad. And the architecture was incredible. I remember walking down the street, and just out of nowhere, there's a huge art museum that was just beautiful. And it's really cool because London, it melts from the old, the ancient, to the modern, and this transition is seamless. You can go from hundreds buildings that are hundreds of years old to modern skyscrapers that were built in the last 30 years. It's incredible. And the Shard is one of these modern skyscrapers that looks down upon the ancient buildings beneath. And the name is apt, as it does stand out like a, a shard of glass, or a crystal, or something like that. And I remember walking out of the underground, and building just came out of nowhere. Everything else is smaller, older, and then here this is, this massive glass structure. And I wasn't able to go in, sadly, but I remember just seeing this building being like, whoa. And so it kind of stuck with me. And now I have the opportunity to learn more about it, learn more about the history, and then to be able to share that knowledge with you. So before we get into the actual architecture of the structure, I'm going to be going over a quick history of English architecture to set the foundation for the modern works that we see here. Okay, so the first architectural style that we're going to be looking at is going to be Romanesque, or as I'm going to try to be calling it for this video, it's going to be Norman architecture, because this architecture came from the Normans, who were Vikings from Norway, who conquered through France and made their way into England, bringing their culture, their architecture with them. So we're going to be calling this Norman architecture. And so, as we've learned, the biggest clues for telling us that a building is Romanesque are the rounded arches, the rounded windows. And we can see here on the right the White Cathedral with these super thick walls, massive fortifications, defenses, and these little just punched out holes with rounded arches. And you can see on the interior, on your left, this is on the second floor of the White Cathedral, it's St. John's Chapel. And here we see these massive pillars with supporting these massive walls, and these rounded arched windows, letting just a little bit of light in. But these massive pillars holding this great weight. And this is a telltale sign of Romanesque, or in England, Norman architecture. And so this room would have been elaborately decorated in the Romanesque era, or the Norman era, but it was cleared out during the English Reformation, and so now it is just barren, just a really, massive room. And this is called the White Tower because it was whitewashed when it was built in the late 11th century. And then we're going to be moving on to the next architectural style. All right, now the second one we're going to be looking at is Gothic architecture. And just first glance, automatic, these are Gothic. As you can see on the left, the Westminster Abbey, you can see the buttresses, you can see the pointed arches, and you see the rose window. On the right, from a distance, you can still see it. It still has that same shape. You can see the rounded arches. You can see how vertical it is. This is all a part of Gothic architecture. And now, like we've talked about, a lot of windows because the focus is on light. The presence of God was found in light. That's what it was believed in the church during this time. And so the support for the walls was put on the outside rather than just having these massive thick pillars and thick walls. Now we're able to make these walls lighter because we have these buttresses on the outside supporting. So thinner walls, larger windows. And so looking back Historians have broken up English Gothic style into three phases: the early English style, the decorated style, and the perpendicular style, which we will take a look at briefly on the next slide. All right, so now we're talking about the early English style, decorative style, and perpendicular style. And so, like we see on the left, we can see those ribbed vaults, very obviously Gothic, but there are still some Romanesque or Norman influences. Like we can see these massive, thick pillars. We see where it leads. These pillars are essentially Romanesque. And then we see a larger change as we go into the decorative style. We see more intricate, elaborate windows. The focus was on the windows, introducing what they called, or what has been called, bar tracery, which you can see these thin pieces of stone dividing the window, allowing for, like I said, more intricate windows. And then we get to the perpendicular style, the most elaborate of Gothic styles. And this is where the style that was applied to the windows, the decorative style, continues throughout the entire interior. And also, one of the big things about Gothic architecture, like I mentioned previously, is this focus on verticality. And like we're going to see, the Shard is reminiscent of this Gothic focus on being vertical, on the height. And they were able to use modern techniques and materials to achieve something Gothic architects and engineers only dreamed of. And so, now that we have the history, the stage is set, let's start talking about the Shard, focusing in on what it is. Perfect place to start, the architect. Mr. Renzo Piano, super cool name, it's his actual name. Like, didn't change it to be cooler or anything. It's his name. He was born September 14th, 1937, so he's about 85 now, and he was born to a family of builders in Genoa, Italy. And so, after graduating from the Polytechnic in Milan in '64, he went on to work with his father for a few years until he formed a partnership with a British architect, Richard Rogers, who, as we're going to see on the next slide, was involved in one of his first buildings. And so, with Rogers, he had a project in Paris, the Centre Georges Pompidou. Sorry if I messed that up. Finished that in '77. It's going to be the image on your right. And it was a structure with exposed air ducts, elevators. So it's like some of the buildings we've talked about previously, where the interior is just as important as the exterior. There doesn't need to be this facade or a covering up. The inside is just as important as the outside. And a lot of people were opposed to this because this is back in '77, so a lot of people were very structured and didn't like this. But despite this, it became an internationally renowned building and led to the revitalization of the surrounding area, surrounding buildings. And he has designed buildings all around the world in tons of countries, from Italy, France, and England to the US, China, Japan. He had one in Switzerland, like just all over the place. And one of his other designs was the New York Times HQ, as you can see on your left here. And just on a first glance, you can see the similarities with the Shard, its use of glass as a kind of shell or exoskeleton around the building. And so, now that we have covered the history, set the stage for understanding the builder, we can now jump in to studying the architecture of the Shard. Okay, so it was originally called the London Bridge Tower, but that changed into the Shard because of the way it looks. It looks like a shard of glass sticking out of the ground, towering over everything. So it was finished in 2012, and once again, Piano received a lot of criticism for the building, as it doesn't conform to the rest of the city. It was the tallest building in Western Europe upon its completion, and is still the tallest or the second tallest in England, and the seventh tallest in all of Europe. So this is still a revolutionary building. And he received a lot of criticism for it, but it's still there. It's led to, just like with back in Pompidou, building up the rest of the surrounding area. And so it's located in Southwark, London, on the south bank of the River Thames, close to the London Bridge and Tower Bridge you can see here on the left, and a short walk from an 800-year-old cathedral, the Southwark Cathedral, which I was also actually able to see when I was walking around the area. It's really cool. And it might be a little bit small, but if you're able to see, there are the pointed arches. This is a very early Gothic style. You can definitely see a lot of the Romanesque or Norman influences. But as you can see in that picture, you can see the shard from very far away. It is very just in your face. It's very noticeable. And this is the environment that it was built in. It was just plopped down. This is the nature surrounding it. And so we're going to be talking about that in the next slide. Okay, so now talking about the nature of the building. At first glance, it doesn't seem to have to do a whole lot with nature, material and style, which we'll get to in a minute. But it's very consistent with the surrounding architecture. London and most modern cities don't have a whole lot of nature at the core. However, the structure is still very concerned, as this slide is very on the nose. Solar power. All of the exterior is solar panels. It's all solar. So that brings in a whole lot of energy. And this is, like it says in our book, it's organic technology or passive technology, as it is creating a lot of power or energy. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the nature of the structure and now the city. It is a vertical city. The focus of the building was to make the city vertical. There's no more space to spread out. Everything is very compact. Everything's very close. But this provides a new way to live in the city. There's 72 floors and a whole bunch of parking spots. A total of 48. So there's not a whole lot of parking. So this forces visitors and the residents to be involved in the city around them. Like I said at the very beginning, I exited the underground directly next to the retail area of the Shard. There's public transport right there, and it was built to sustain this, to be a part of this. And so 72 floors, as you can see in the image right here. The first 27, 28 are for offices, and then the next couple are restaurants. Then it goes into hotel, the residence, and then the observatories. So places to just go up and see the expanse of the city, offering spectacular views. Everything that I've seen, it is just gorgeous. Okay, so rounding it out, going to be talking just a minute about form. So as you can see here, a lot of concrete, a lot of steel, and then obviously a whole lot of glass. That's the main components of the structure. Not a whole lot to explain here, but speaking of how it was built, there was heavy use of computers and very modern technology in order to make sure that it would stand, that it could withstand natural phenomenon and would stand for centuries. This is meant to last. This is meant to be a part of London for a very long time. And so that's something that we can see here. The material is going to last a long time. And the form, it's also inspired by nearby architecture. It's inspired by the spires of cathedrals. And so we can see it is a spire meant to be a beacon for the city of London. So thank you for listening. Hopefully it didn't take up too much of your time. And yeah, have a great winter break and next semester. Thanks, guys.